everyone, Jason Gilbo here at JGilbo11, taking a look at NBA value plays for tonight's 9-game slate. Jumping into Vegas real quick, a lot of high over-unders. I mean, we're looking at Milwaukee, Houston, sitting at 227 at the moment. Oklahoma City, Golden State at 227 as well. That one does have a 12.5-point spread, so obviously there is some blowout concern there. Obviously, no Steven Adams is definitely a downgrade. Warriors at home were always had that blowout potential, as we saw last game against the Cavs. Overall, though, still plenty of value there. Durant going against his old team that he says it's never going to be a regular season game against. Gotta like that. And also you have the showing of Greek Freak and Harden, two triple-double potential guys tonight. So outside of that, though, I mean, there's a lot of other games to focus on. I think New York and Boston's, pretty safe at 218. Portland, Charlotte's probably going to fly really under the radar. We're going to talk about some guys there at 215. Indiana, Sacramento, two of the poor defensive teams, 215. And also we got Toronto and Philly there. Just Toronto being 5-point favorites. So could be indication that we might see DeMar DeRozan possibly take a seat for rest. We saw Kyle Lowry, was out last night, had us all scrambling. So overall, there's a couple games, Orlando, New Orleans, 208. Don't mind that. Memphis and Washington, 205. A couple pieces there. Atlanta, Detroit's the lowest on the night at 201. But that's certainly not one that you can kind of maybe look to fade. It's not one that I'm going to be looking at for, high price guys, and it's just more a couple of value plays. So diving into point guards, in terms of injuries tonight, not a lot to really talk about for point guards. TJ McConnell sat out the last game. We saw Sergio Rodriguez pick up a lot of the minutes, 32. Got 28 DK points. Wasn't too bad, 10, 7, and 6 with a steal, 3 turnovers. 4,600 on DK, not that bad. On FanDuel, I'm not really inclined to use him. 4,100, I know he's cheap, but I don't feel like I really need to dive down that low tonight. I know there's a lot of high-priced guys you might be looking to go a little bit stars and scrubs, but overall, I'm fine with just kind of fading him. McConnell's probably looking to play anyway. The other one, Ty Lawson, he's questionable, dealing with a sprained ankle. This one's probably a true game-time decision. If he's out, that does shift a little bit more minutes to Darren Collison, Garrett Temple. Collison's only been playing about 26 minutes over the last week or so, 29 on the season. Probably get him up in the mid-30s, which would be good for his game. I don't mind him tonight in terms of a value sense if Lawson sits. If Lawson plays, I'm probably just going to be off them in general. So working the way up here, Elfrid Payton's still really cheap, playing really well, coming off back-to-back strong games. You look at New Orleans, 26 in defensive efficiency against point guards. Payton's still one of my favorite value plays here tonight. I think he's relatively safe in cash games, even though I know the consistency over a long period of time hasn't been there. But this is another great matchup for him to continue. The minutes have been pretty safe. So hopefully that kind of continues tonight. Outside of that, I mean, this is obviously a slate where there are a lot of high potential point guards. So we're moving up the list here. Derrick Rose, I definitely don't mind. Isaiah Thomas, obviously not known for his defense. Boston, middle of the road defensive efficiency against Rose or point guards. We look at Rose, just a GPP play for me tonight. I trust Payton a little bit more, and I don't really find that he's all that consistent. So looking at him. Outside of that, though, I mean, we're getting below that 7K range. Those are the only two that really catch my eye. I mean, I don't mind Patrick Beverley in that high total. You can look at his way. I know Tim Hardaway Jr. is point guard eligible. I'll talk about him as a shooting guard, though. I'm not really looking to use him at point guard. Moving up the list here, though, I mean, there are a couple mid-range guys you can possibly fire away with. Kemba Walker, I think, is a sneaky pick tonight, mid-range on both sides. Jrue Holiday, if Anthony Davis is out, is going to get a bump for me. We saw his big game with Davis out, what he can do. I definitely don't mind him. A little bit more usage just shifts to him and Tyreke Evans, who I'll talk about. As far as pay-up options, I mean, I'm not really looking to use Westbrook tonight. I think there are a lot of other studs. I don't think the potential is really there for his upside just because of the blowout potential. And I think if you're getting high 40s out of him, it's not particularly hitting value at this point. So you're more kind of playing him if you're thinking that game really is going to stay close and he's just going to stick it to Golden State. But No Steven Adams. I don't like a lot of these other pieces. I know Cantor's there, but Cantor's not a defensive guy. Oladipo hasn't really been a great secondary piece, so I do kind of worry about the blowout potential in that game. Don't mind Curry, don't mind Lowry. Obviously, Lowry's probably my favorite play of the group up there. And obviously, you do have Harden and Giannis who are DraftKings eligible at point guard, but don't really look to ever use them at point guard. You usually use them at shooting guard or small forward. So looking at shooting guard, moving over here for value, possible injuries. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, questionable, probably more on the doubtful side, did not practice yesterday. So you can look at Stanley Johnson as probably a low-end value option tonight. Did come away with a nice outing against the Lakers. Very cheap, more of a stars and scrubs type lineup type of guy. He's one of the guys that I'm not really focused in on for that Atlanta Detroit game, just because it's kind of a gross defensive game. I could see it kind of being a little bit ugly. I do like Atlanta's players a little bit more than I do Detroit. So not a guy I'm looking to really use tonight. He's out there. If you're building multiple lineups, I don't mind throwing him in, so that's okay with me. Evan Fournier is another one questionable. Did sit out against Denver. So we are looking at Jody Meeks as being a guy who will step in and play probably 30-plus minutes as he has in the last 2 games. Not tremendous upside. A good filler if you're building kind of that stars and scrubs, 34, 38 minutes. He's going to need that certainly because he is a little bit scoring dependent. It was nice to see 10 assists over the last 2 games. But, really until he's getting 20 points, he's not really going to get you above 30 fantasy points. So there's something to look at. Outside of that, though, those are the only real 2 injuries that I see here early on in the day. As far as value goes, I don't mind Kent Bazemore, shooting guard eligible on DK, small forward on FanDuel. Korver's out of the picture. Kent Bazemore been playing pretty consistent here of late over the last week or so, 25 fantasy points per game. Does have 30-plus upside. He's one of the guys I actually don't mind against this Detroit team. I think you can look his way. And also, if DeRozan does sit, this is just pure speculation at this point. Guys like Terrence Ross, Norman Powell would get a bump. I don't mind using them in terms of a punt sense. So moving up the list, Tim Hardaway is the guy that I'm most attracted to. As far as the value play, 16, 2, and 2 over his last 5 games, 28 minutes per game in that span. You can really look at him as a source of value and feel pretty comfortable tonight, especially with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope being on the doubtful side. That certainly helps out defensively. So definitely like him. Tyreek Evans, obviously a guy who isn't playing huge minutes, still coming back with injury, playing lower 20s, mid-20s at times. Averaging over 25 fantasy points over the last 5 games, and the price is coming up a little bit more, which isn't exactly all that great. But Anthony Davis, obviously, a lot of usage of him is going to come off the bench and play pretty well. So he's a pretty good option tonight. I think he's fine in all formats. As far as the mid-range goes, obviously James Harden kind of takes the cake at shooting guard tonight. Nicholas Batum's the guy I'm interested in against his former team. Looking at him, he's probably the other guy here in the shooting guard spot that is a triple-double threat, not named Giannis, not named James Harden. So for me, I kind of like him as a pivot tonight. He's kind of sneaky. We look at that total, 215, Charlotte's at home, 4.5-point favorites. I don't think a lot of people are going to look at that game they're going to be drawn towards Milwaukee and OKC and those types of teams, Boston, kind of the higher profile teams. So I'll certainly be looking at Batum. If you want to play him in cash games, that's fine. I think you're going to get some really low ownership on him in GPPs as well. So small forward, injury wise, nothing really for me to report here. You do have some values like Stanley Johnson, like Bazemore that I don't mind. DeMarre Carroll obviously kind of disappointed us last night against Brooklyn. I don't mind him again here. Obviously on the back-to-back, it's a little bit concerning, but we look back to a back-to-back earlier that last week. Played 41 minutes against Chicago on the 7th, 34 against Houston. Had a down game against Chicago, but scored 40 fantasy points against Houston. So I don't think back-to-back minutes are really a concern for Carroll anymore. I don't mind him as a cheap option. Mid-range here, though, Trevor Ariza was another guy. Average night last night. He's a big minutes hog. Great matchup against Milwaukee, who's allowing the most points per game to small forward this season. You do have Tyreek Evans on DraftKings. So There's a lot of different ways you can go at small forward. I don't think it's a spot you necessarily have to pay up for on DraftKings. I think if you are, you're going with Durant. But I do like Carmelo Anthony. 7,700 on FanDuel is a really nice price tag for him. Same with Paul George. So, I mean, you can get two guys that are two elite scorers, for just a little bit over 15K. And with that, I mean, you're kind of taking away the sense of you can use Durant and, maybe someone else like a Aaron Gordon or Trevor Ariza, but you're also getting Paul George, Carmelo Anthony for a similar price between those two. So definitely think about that. Aaron Gordon's also a value that you can be looking at for GPPs. I do like this game as far as a value sense, especially if Anthony Davis is on the New Orleans side. But you look at this Magic team, they've been playing pretty well. New Orleans 21st in defensive efficiency against small forwards. Gordon, 30-plus fantasy points in 5 of the last 10, but also does have 4 below 20, so he's just a GPP play for me. But I do like him in a tournament sense. So those are kind of the mid-range options, and also, Carmelo and Paul George are two focal points that, yes, they're scoring 10 less points per game than Kevin Durant fantasy points, but they're also 4K cheaper. So certainly going to be looking at them tonight as pivots if, in multiple lineup construction. So, but definitely look to get your Durant exposure as well. Power forward, obviously the big news would be Anthony Davis, probably on the doubtful side, dealing with 2 injuries. For me, it's a tale of two sites. I like Terrence Jones as the fill-in option. 6,700 on DraftKings. This is where the pricing comes in between both sites. He's only 5,300 on FanDuel, so a much better value play on FanDuel than DraftKings. I don't mind him on DraftKings still, but obviously the appeal is not as sexy because of that high price tag. But I definitely don't mind it. Look at Porzingis. He's been kind of on the fence over the last few games. Was ruled out last game. Could be playing tonight, but probably a game time decision is what we're going to be leading up to. I still like more the focal points of Rose and Melo if he's out. I know Kuzminskas picked up a lot of minutes. I don't mind him as a punt option. 27 DK points last time out, 26 FanDuel points. So a pretty solid value in that sense, and also a decent matchup there against Boston. So he'd probably be the other fill-in I'd be looking at. Outside of that, not much. Ryan Anderson missed last night's game with an illness. He could be questionable again tonight. I'm still not really looking to use that Rockets front court. Clint Capella, Montrezl Harrell, still kind of a mystery in terms of minutes. We saw Trevor Ariza shift up into the 4 and play, so that would be something to note. Corey Brewer came in and stepped in, but Corey Brewer is not going to be a guy who's going to pick up a lot of minutes anyway. So looking at value there, obviously Terrence Jones would be a great one on FanDuel. Looking at some other low-end options, I mean, I like Thaddeus Young at that mid-range price. You do have some DraftKings eligibility with DeMarre Carroll, Aaron Gordon there. Kelly Olynyk on DraftKings, 4,500. Been sneaky GPP play for me tonight. I mean, this is a guy who's averaged nearly 30 fantasy points in 2 games against the Knicks this season. New York allowing 108 points per game. Olynyk averaging about over 25 fantasy points over his last 6 games and shooting 63% from 3. Kind of a guy who I'm interested in a tournament sense because I don't think a lot of people will have him. He's in play on FanDuel as well, but I think the 3-point bonus and just the potential for a double-double is there for Olynyk if he gets those big minutes. I like him a little bit more on DraftKings, but certainly in play on both sides. John Lure, questionable for tonight. Tobias Harris will pick up some extra minutes. That's pretty much about it with that situation. But really, I think you're kind of looking at that mid-range of Thaddeus Young. I mean, I don't mind Tobias Harris, Terrence Jones. Zach Randolph's the guy who I like quite a bit tonight, playing a little bit more minutes here of late, averaging 6 more minutes in his last 5 than his season average. 17, 12, and 2 in that span. Washington ranks 25th in defensive efficiency against power forwards, 17th in rebounding. So Randolph's kind of sneaky and a really good price on both sides, so I definitely like him. And obviously, if you're kind of paying up, I mean, I don't mind Cantor. I'm not his biggest fan of this new price tag. I like Jabari Parker, Draymond Green are obviously kind of your better pay up options. So looking at center, Joel Embiid, I mean, looking at him, he could be on a restriction here in terms of just, being a rest threat, especially at that price tag. So if he's out, obviously you're looking at Noel and Okafor to pick up more minutes. Usage shifts around, so that would be something to note. Andre Drummond sat out practice. He would be a guy, if he's out, obviously, with Baines possibly out too, you guys all love it. We all love it. Boban show would be worth a look in a tournament. I still don't think he's going to be a guy who eats up monster minutes, but obviously his fantasy points per minute, if he sees 20, this dude can double-double in 15 minutes. So, if you're looking for a punt, if that happens, I'm not opposed to it. So one thing to consider there. Moving on down the list here, the mid-range is pretty intriguing. Al Horford, 6,900 on DraftKings, I like quite a bit. Over on FanDuel, 7,300, not a bad price tag. You look at Boston, I haven't really talked about the guards all that much. I'm more looking at kind of the secondary pieces in Horford. New York, 28th in defensive efficiency against centers. Horford averaged 15, 8, and 5 over his last 6 games, 40 points in a prior meeting against the Knicks. I like him quite a bit in cash games. GPPs, you could probably look elsewhere because, I don't think the upside's crazy high on a GPP winning, but I do like him quite a bit. Steven Adams out tonight. Obviously, Cantor's going to play bigger minutes as long as that game doesn't get out of control. Outside of that, though, you're not really looking at much as far as injuries go. Some mid-range guys. I don't mind Mason Plumlee. Charlotte's a team I do like to target centers against. Do rank 24th in defensive efficiency, are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game. I like Plumlee because he's versatile in terms of fantasy production. And he's always kind of at a cheaper price, so definitely don't mind him here. Outside of that, though, center's a spot that I'm kind of looking to sit really in that mid-range. Greg Monroe, great tournament option tonight just because his minutes are always consistent, but a good fantasy points per minute guy. And with that high total, I certainly don't mind getting exposure to it. Valanciunas was pretty mediocre last night. Looking for him to rebound, I think you can take a step on him. Vucevic continues to be an excellent price on DraftKings, 6,600. I'll certainly be looking his way. So that's going to wrap things up here. Taking a look at NBA value. If you want to check out our GPP picks, cheat sheets, head on over to dailyfantasycafe.com. Also be sure to check out our tools, lineup optimizer, lots of great stuff. So we'll see you guys on Friday.